Welcome to Crime Soup Podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Carter.
And I'm Hannah.
And for our first episode, Hannah and I will be discussing the tragic murder of a 15-year-old girl in Salt Lake City, Utah, whose case went cold over 30 years ago. This is the story of Debbie Grabher. Deborah Marie Grabher was born in Lancaster, California on July 20th, 1976, to parents Patrick Lawrence and Cynthia Young Grabher. Debbie's parents were separated. Her father lived in Nevada and her mother lived in Salt Lake City. Debbie had been living with her father in Nevada, but he became overwhelmed by her teenage behavior and didn't feel like he could keep her from engaging in sexual relationships, so he sent her to a group home in Ohio. Yeah, because that always helps. In October 1991, Debbie ran away from her group home to live with her mother, Cindy, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Debbie was 15 years old when she arrived in Utah and began attending West High School in Salt Lake City. Debbie was described as quiet and antisocial, but also quick-witted and generous toward others. She enjoyed reading, drawing, writing poetry, and maintaining her appearance. Her dream was to become a fashion model and work in either New York or Chicago. In the early morning hours of January 16, 1992, a Thursday, Debbie's mother, Cindy, arrived home from her graveyard shift at the Rosewood Terrace Care Center, a nursing home in Salt Lake City. According to Cindy's live-in girlfriend, Catherine Fredrickson, Debbie had left for school about 6:30 a.m., dressed in her winter clothes and carrying a copy of Hollywood Husbands, a book by Jackie Collins. Debbie's school, West High School, was about a 25-minute walk from her house. When Debbie failed to come home after school that day, her mother Cindy waited until about 8 p.m. before calling Debbie's probation officer to report her missing, and then called the police at about 10 p.m. when she still hadn't returned. Because Debbie had a history of running away, the police told Cindy to wait until the next day to see if Debbie showed up for school. As expected, obviously, Debbie did not show up for school on Friday. In fact, it was discovered that she never made it to school the previous morning. That same day, on Friday, January 17th, the police received a phone call from a witness stating that they saw a transient-looking white person with long dark hair and a thick, long army coat dumping what looked like a body wrapped in blankets behind some local businesses. The perpetrator was apparently seen pushing a bundle of blankets in a shopping cart until the shopping cart accidentally tipped over on the icy sidewalk. The perpetrator then took the bundles out, dragged it across the snow-covered lot behind some local businesses, and covered it with sagebrush. Then the perpetrator reportedly left on foot, headed south in the direction of the Grabher home, only a short distance down the street. The witness happened to be at a nearby tow truck business early in the morning hours, about 5 to 6 a.m., and saw the perpetrator from about 100 yards away. The witness then walked the distance to where they saw the suspicious person discard the bundle and nudge the blankets with their feet, and felt strongly that there was a body inside. When police arrived to investigate the bundle of blankets, they uncovered the deceased body of 15-year-old Debbie Grabher, wrapped in 2 different blankets and several sheets, her body tightly bound with restraints. Police believe her time of death occurred sometime during the night, between Thursday and Friday, meaning she was alive up to about 20 hours after she was last reported seen alive by Catherine Fredrickson on Thursday morning, but the cold temperature affected the ability to accurately gauge her time of death. An autopsy was performed and her manner of death was ruled a homicide, but the cause of death, as well as the condition of her body, is remaining unreleased for investigative purposes. Recovered alongside her body was the copy of Hollywood Husbands that she was seen leaving the house with. It's unknown whether or not Debbie left the house with a backpack or any other school supplies, and nothing of that nature was found with her body. The 2 blankets found with Debbie's body were a pink bedspread and a very dirty green blanket covered in grease and cigarette burns, which police believe was more likely used as a sort of rug instead of a blanket. The blankets were found to contain black and white animal hairs, and the bottom of the green blanket had been cut off. There were also several bed sheets which police were able to determine originally came from the local Little America hotel that was known to donate their old sheets to homeless shelters. When Cindy was shown the blankets found with her daughter's body, she reportedly said that they did not come from her household. A boot print was discovered in the snow near Debbie's body that appeared to come from a pair of relatively new Outback brand boots. The logo and tread of the boots didn't appear to have any noticeable wear based on the print left in the snow, leading investigators to believe that the shoes were new. Because the surrounding snow was so icy, investigators were unable to find enough additional footprints to track the perpetrator's trail. The shopping cart used to transport Debbie's body was found abandoned nearby and taken into evidence. No physical evidence was recovered from the cart, and no hopes of recovering any DNA remains, since the cart was not protected from contamination while in storage. Because DNA technology was so new when this crime was committed, police didn't know how important preserving the shopping cart would later become and may have potentially destroyed important evidence. Most importantly, several human hairs were recovered from the crime scene that have been preserved and have the potential to finally close this case. According to police, it's only a matter of time and money before those hairs will be tested and a genetic profile can be drafted of their owner. After Debbie's death, police canvassed her neighborhood and collected DNA samples from everyone they could. If the perpetrator was included in the sampling, the case could finally try its first suspect. Additionally, thanks to Debbie's love of writing, police were able to recover a potentially relevant entry in her diary that tells of her fascination with a local man. Based on Debbie's diary and the accounts of her family, classmates, and teachers, Debbie wasn't dating or romantically interested in anyone at her school. But by her own admission, there was a man whose house she would purposely walk her dog past in hopes of catching his attention. Nothing else about this man was detailed in Debbie's diary, but police suspect that he lived very close by and was most likely older than Debbie. Finally, there was a nylon strap that was found at the scene, black, less than half an inch thick, and about 24 inches long. Debbie's mother, Cindy, and her live-in girlfriend, Kat Fredrickson Wood, were both questioned by police and were reportedly very cooperative with the investigation. Their lesbian relationship, their involvement in satanic witchcraft, and their admitted BDSM practices were especially highlighted by news media and caused speculation about their involvement in Debbie's death. A small satanic shrine was also discovered in Cindy and Kat's bedroom, although they denied that Debbie was a part of any of their practices. Kat did not have a verifiable alibi for the time of the murder, but based on her physical description in comparison to the person witnesses saw, and because she had known mobility issues due to her weight and back problems, she is not a suspect. Witnesses described seeing what looked like a man, about 6 feet tall, of medium build, roughly 180 pounds, whereas Kat was well over 6 feet tall and exceptionally overweight. Kat Fredrickson Wood had an ex-husband named Lawrence Wood that frequented the two women's home. Kat and Lawrence had a special needs son together who lived at a nearby facility for psychiatric care. Lawrence lived about 1.5 miles away and would visit Kat at her house, and they would do drugs together. Coincidentally, after Debbie's murder, the rental house directly behind their duplex was raided by the Salt Lake City Narcotics Division for several criminal activities, namely prostitution and the sale of heroin and cocaine. This drug house was not on police's radar at the time of Debbie's murder, and nobody at the house has ever been questioned in relation to her death or submitted to DNA sampling. Because of the nature of drug houses in general, it's difficult to track down all of the various people that would have frequented the property. The oversight of this drug house may have been the most damning part of this investigation, potentially causing the case to run cold for this long.
Okay, so everything about Debbie's case mentioned so far is information given to us directly from the Salt Lake City Police Homicide Division. I actually met with one of their detectives in February, and we walked the crime scene, and I showed up to the walkthrough, and I had all of this information that I had gathered from news articles published back in 1992, and the police detective immediately refuted almost everything that had been published by the news, but he also gave me an in-depth tour of the crime scene, and he also gave me never-before-released details about the case. Most of what we're going to talk about going forward is information that was published by local news reporters, and they're details that the police does not want to verify for whatever reason, most likely to protect the integrity of the investigation. But Kaylee and I are going to go ahead and combine the details that the police have confirmed with details that either the family has come out and said or that the news has published. And we're going to combine those details and we're going to analyze them and come up with some of our own analyses and our own theories about what maybe happened to Debbie that day. So first, I want to talk about Debbie's household. So Debbie ran away from her group home in Ohio to live in Salt Lake City with her mom and her mom's girlfriend, Kat, who were a lesbian couple that also admittedly practiced witchcraft and BDSM. According to the retired police detective that I spoke with, Detective Cordon Parks, the relationship between Debbie and her mom's girlfriend was strained, with Debbie being described as kind of a wet blanket on the women's sexual relationship, since they were not planning on having Debbie live with them. So when Debbie arrived in Salt Lake City, it was very unexpected. And as you can imagine, that kind of caused a strain on her mom and her mom's girlfriend.
That's wild. That's crazy. I mean, like, that, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, like, there is a point of contention there, according to the detective. And I understand it. Like, it makes sense. But that's just something to think, like, keep in the back of your head, like, how these relationships are playing out.
Yeah.
In reality, you know. So Kat, Cindy's girlfriend, Kat Wood, she was unemployed, and she was basically housebound due to her weight and her back problems. And Cindy, Debbie's mom, was working full-time graveyard shifts at a local nursing home to support the household. So we have Kat, who's basically home all of the time. And then another person to think about is that Kat has an ex-husband named Lawrence, who also lives nearby. And I guess they still had a good relationship because he would frequent the women's house. And I guess Kat and her ex-husband Lawrence would do drugs together at night when Cindy wasn't around, when Cindy was at work.
Do we know what kind of drugs they were doing?
We don't. I mean, the police probably know, but they just said they would hang out together and they would do drugs together.
I mean, it's Salt Lake City, and Utah does have a crazy opioid problem, so
yeah,
speculating.
And we also know that Kat had back problems, so it's really not surprising to me that she maybe is self-prescribing with something either legally or illegally.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And kind of more on the ex-husband Lawrence. We don't know a ton about him, but we do have a statement from Debbie's mom, Cindy, when she spoke to the news reporters back in 1992, right after Debbie's murder. According to ABC News 4, Cindy stated that she had actually asked Lawrence to stop going to her house at night when she wasn't there. And she also said publicly that Debbie absolutely hated Lawrence, once even spitting on him.
So that's crazy that Cindy actually said that to the media. Like it was almost, she was speculating that Lawrence had something to do with her daughter's murder by publicly saying that.
Yeah, and I don't think that we should discredit that. Like,
yeah.
I feel like probably Cindy knows what's up. She probably knows more than anyone else, like the dynamics of the household, who maybe police should be looking into, because like with most crimes, with most murders, with most kidnappings, it's usually someone close to the family or someone that the victim knows.
Exactly.
So other than these three people, besides Cindy, Kat, and Lawrence, apparently Debbie, she didn't really have any other friends or family that would really visit the home. Her biological dad lived in Nevada. He was not nearby. He has an alibi. And she, according to her teachers and her classmates, wasn't really that social. She didn't have a boyfriend. She didn't have any romantic interests. She didn't have people over to her house. And she was actually actively trying to transfer to another school. She was trying to essentially graduate early because she wanted to pursue her modeling career. So being social and having a bunch of friends really wasn't part of her life.
And she was probably somewhat of a social outcast anyway, considering that she had lesbian moms in the 90s in Salt Lake City, Utah. Like,
exactly.
That probably was not easy on her social career in high school.
No, and she was beautiful, right?
Yeah.
She was gorgeous. It makes sense that she was pursuing modeling because she was a beautiful young girl. But yeah, she had lesbian guardians in the 90s who were practicing witchcraft and BDSM. She probably was not keen on having people over at the house.
No.
She was probably mortified. And also, she has not really, a criminal history. She kind of has a criminal history. She was considered, a teenage delinquent. She had a probation officer, right?
Yeah.
She had a history of running away. So I'm sure making friends was hard for her. And then the only other significant person that the police were looking at was the man that Debbie wrote about in her diary. The man that she said that she would walk her dog past his house purposefully to try and catch his attention.
Yeah.
All we really know about him, she never says his name. We just know that he most likely lived nearby, close enough that she could walk her dog, and police believe that he was most likely older than her. But how much older, we don't really know.
Yeah.
Also, the person that witnesses described seeing discard her body was supposedly about 6 feet tall, medium build, and 180 pounds. But since that witness saw the crime from over 100 yards or about 100 yards in the dark, we have to take that with a grain of salt and take into consideration that it was dark outside and we don't necessarily know how accurate it is. The other thing is, when Debbie's mother, Cindy, was shown her daughter's body, she told investigators that the blankets that Debbie was wrapped in didn't come from their household. But according to one article from the Salt Lake Tribune dated February 20th, 1992, so about a month after the murder, investigators actually searched the Grabher home immediately after Debbie's body was discovered. And they noted upon entering the house that all of her bedding was missing from her bedroom.
What? That's crazy.
Well, and it paints the family in a bad light. If you're trying to find out who murdered her and you find her wrapped in a bunch of bedding, specifically a pink bedspread, which you would probably associate with a girl's bedroom, and you go to the house and all of her bedding is missing, that doesn't look good for the family.
No, not at all.
Right? But the case runs cold after this, right? They have all these details that kind of point back to the family, back to that house, but they can't actually pin the blame on anyone. There isn't enough evidence to really convict anyone. So we kind of have to piece together what we think happened, whether or not the family really was involved, because that is really suspicious that not only was the bedding from her bedroom missing, but the bedding that she was found wrapped in had black and white animal hairs on it, and that family had black and white animals. I think they had a cat and a dog with black and white hair.
If DNA had been a bigger thing, I feel like this would have been a totally shut door case. Like, we wouldn't even be talking about this because they would have found out who had done it long ago.
But luckily, so this is new information that the police just told me, right? Back in February when I was talking to them.
Yeah.
This was never released to news media, but alongside Debbie's body, the police were able to find human hairs that did not belong to her, and they think probably belonged to the perpetrator.
So this is never before heard evidence, like
Correct.
ever.
Ever.
Brand new. You were the first civilian person to hear about it.
Yes.
That's crazy.
I mean, because it's been 30 years, and the police said that they haven't really talked openly about what evidence they do have. They've been trying to keep it under tight wraps, but it's been going on for so long. I think they're at a point where they just want to see if the public knows anything and get the public's help as much as possible. But right now, with the hairs that they have, it's just a matter of time and money, right? It's an expensive process to get those hairs tested. But also, so going back to like the bedding and the bedding being missing from Debbie's bedroom, Debbie's mom, when she was speaking to the news, actually more recently. So Debbie's mom, I think, is still alive because there's some quotes from ABC News 4 from October 2019, so only 3 years ago. And Cindy disclosed to the news that Debbie's body had been found tightly bound and blindfolded.
Which is interesting considering her parents' exposure to BDSM, which can include like rope tying and knotting and binding.
Exactly. So like everything makes the family look guilty. Like the bedding is missing. She's found tightly bound. She's found blindfolded. Like this just seems very sadistic. And when I asked the police whether or not those statements by the news were true, they didn't say that they were false. They just said that they did not want to disclose the condition of her body. So everything that we're going to talk about right now about the blindfold is complete speculation. We're assuming that Cindy was being truthful. my guess is that she probably disclosed that information accidentally or not realizing that the police were trying to keep it withheld. But it hasn't been verified technically. So my question is, if Debbie had in fact been blindfolded by her killer, that changes who we're looking for, right? That gives us some insight into the crime, right? Because blindfolding serves a purpose. So in Debbie's case, what purpose did it serve?
I mean, that makes me think she knew her killer or she wasn't intentionally killed.
Exactly. I'm not an expert, but I mean, I've watched enough, I've read and watched enough, crime thrillers that like the times when you see someone being blindfolded, there's like kidnapping cases, right? Where the perpetrator is not planning on killing the victim.
Yeah.
They just are trying to conceal their identity until they can release them.
Yeah. Or they have guilt and don't want to look at that person or have that person look and know that it was them.
Exactly. So obviously she was not released. She was killed. So I'm leaning more toward the fact that it was probably someone that she knew and they didn't want her looking at them.
Yeah.
Or knowing their identity. Something that was not ever published in the newspapers that the police told me when I met with them was that alongside Debbie's body was actually recovered the book that she was seen leaving the house with that morning, her copy of Hollywood Husbands. But then she didn't have any other school supplies or even a backpack with her. She was just wearing her winter clothes, and she had a single non-academic book with her when she supposedly left for school that morning. And that bothered me. Well, when the police mentioned that, I immediately was like, that is very weird. And I didn't talk to the investigator about it, but after I went home, I could not stop thinking about it. Because if you're going to discard a person's body, why would you take the time to also return a book with them?
Yeah, we don't know if Debbie was redressed, do we?
Yeah, we don't know if she was sexually assaulted or not. When I first read her case, I kind of assumed that she had been, because otherwise I don't know what the motive is, why you would kidnap someone, bind them, blindfold them, especially a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
But she was found fully clothed.
Okay. So yeah, that is weird that everything was returned back to normal, assuming that she was sexually assaulted or anything like that with her book. Like they put everything back in place with her, which is strange.
Well, yeah, the book bothers me. Why did they take the time to return the book with her body? Why not just discard it or whatever? It doesn't matter. The other weird thing is that we even know that she left the house with it.
Yeah, because Kat made a point to say that she left the house with it, right?
And she knew the exact title, which is kind of weird to me.
Yeah.
That she, when Kat was asked about Debbie going to school, she specifically was like, yes, she was wearing this outfit and she had this specific book with her, which just seems like kind of a finer detail. I don't know.
Yeah.
But also it makes you wonder what kind of student leaves for school and doesn't have a book bag or any other school supplies, just a non-academic book.
She wasn't going to school. There's no way.
Well, we all know students like that who they don't care.
Yeah.
And maybe it's possible that she didn't care and she was planning on transferring anyway, and so she just, but then at that point, why was she even going?
For appearances, to get out of the house, to keep her parents off her back.
Yeah, maybe.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, because her mom would have been home during the day, so if she hadn't gone to school, her mom would have known.
Yeah.
And maybe even harassed her about it.
Yeah.
I think one theory that the police have is that maybe she wasn't on her way to school, but maybe she was on her way to go meet up with someone else or go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Which definitely is one good theory, is that she wasn't going to school. Maybe she met up with someone who eventually killed her.
Okay, so Hannah and I have one large theory about Debbie's murder, but we want to preface this theory by reminding our listeners that we do not have all the facts, and we don't have Debbie's autopsy results. A lot of details are being withheld by police, but based on our limited knowledge of this case, there's one particular person of interest that we believe is more suspicious than the others. Our theory comes from a culmination of evidence, quotes from the family, and our own personal biases. To start, I want to ask you, the listeners, what if Debbie wasn't on her way to school that morning? What if that key testimony from Kat Wood, upon which our entire timeline of events depends, was a lie? Let's re-examine a few of the facts. We know that Debbie's mother, Cindy, was working her usual graveyard shift at Rosewood Terrace Nursing Home and usually arrived home a little after 6:30 a.m., just after Debbie would need to leave the house for school. Sometimes their schedules would even collide and they'd greet each other as Debbie left and Cindy arrived home. On Thursday, January 16, 1992, Cindy did not run into Debbie. Instead, she arrived home and was told by her girlfriend, Kat Wood, that she saw Debbie leave the house about 6:30 a.m., dressed in her winter clothes, carrying a copy of Hollywood Husbands. On nights that Cindy worked graveyard shifts, Debbie and Kat would have been at home alone together. That is, except for Kat's ex-husband. According to an article published by ABC4 Utah in 2019, Cindy reportedly said that Kat had a husband who Debbie absolutely hated. Once she spat on him. I have asked that husband to never come into the house, and he was always in the house every night that I worked. End quote. Why did Debbie reportedly hate Lawrence Wood so much as to spit on him? And why didn't Cindy want him at the house when she wasn't there? We also know, according to police, that Lawrence and Kat would do drugs together. What's the likelihood that they knew about the drug house directly behind Cindy's duplex, possibly even being customers? Also, we know that Debbie's body was found tightly bound with restraints. Cindy and Kat were both open about their BDSM practices, but what's the likelihood that Kat's ex-husband was also familiar with binding after years of being in a relationship with Kat? According to that same ABC4 news article, Cindy was also quoted saying, "This was no accident. I don't know if they actually meant to kill her, but I can't give any other reason you would kidnap someone, tie them up, and cover their eyes." End quote. While police are not at will to say whether or not Debbie was found blindfolded, Cindy disclosed that information to the media, possibly unintentionally. And assuming that it's true, it would make sense that Debbie's killer was someone she knew and would recognize. What if Lawrence was at the house Wednesday night while Cindy was at work? He knew Cindy's schedule, he knew Debbie's schedule, and he could have used that information to his advantage. Police believe that Debbie was held captive and killed somewhere very close to her home, eventually discarded only a block away. The drug house is the most obvious location, and its occupants most likely wouldn't have called the police in order to maintain secrecy about their own criminal activities. One of the occupants could have also been bribed or blackmailed into being the person to discard Debbie's body, which is why none of the persons of interest in this case match the eyewitness's description. Perhaps the blankets missing from Debbie's bedroom were discarded to hide evidence of the real assault against her in her own bedroom while her mom was at work. If we consider that Kat may have given a false timeline in this case, that she may have aided Debbie's killer, and that Debbie was actually abducted sometime during the night instead of on her way to school, it's possible that her killer had several hours to cover their crime and stage Debbie's body. What if Debbie was redressed by her killer, and then, if there was any doubt about the timeline, a book was then strategically placed with her body to make it look like she was on her way to school? Lastly, according to a Deseret News article published less than 2 months after Debbie's murder, Kat told reporters that Lawrence shaved his head and left for San Francisco, leaving her in Salt Lake City as the sole guardian of their son. Why would Lawrence leave? And why then? There are still a lot of unanswered questions about this case, and obviously we don't have the answers. But we'd like to keep Debbie's memory alive. We'd like her family to finally have closure, and we invite you all to share Debbie's story in hopes that she can finally get justice. If you or anyone you know has information regarding Debbie's murder, please contact Detective Cordon Parks with the Salt Lake City Police Department at 801-799-3100. There is a $5,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in this case. Thank you for joining us this week for your first helping of Crime Soup. Be sure to follow us on TikTok at Crime Soup Podcast or Instagram at crime_soup and let us know your thoughts on this case. Tune in next Tuesday for an all-new story. Bon appetit!